Hi everybody, Jane here. And as I've had to do a lot recently, I do want to apologize for kind of the wonky light and setup. The pandemic has made me have to film in my home, which is not fully set up for filming. The library I was filming at before is not allowing people in, so I have to make do with what I have or not film. This is what we have, and I hope that you find the content worthwhile enough that you can excuse the poor lighting. So today I am going to be reviewing two nonfiction books, and these are the only two books I have read or finished during November. I'm actually in the middle of reading two other books, but they will not be completed by the end of November. And so I just wanted to do kind of a review of these two nonfiction books instead of a traditional monthly wrap-up. The first book I read was Never Turn Your Back on an Angus Cow by Dr. Jan Pohl. Now, I had never watched Dr. Pohl's television series, but apparently he is a country vet who has a TV series on Nat Geo where he is followed around and he takes care of animals and he teaches people a little bit about life as a veterinarian. I went into this book expecting something close to what I'd read before from James Herriot and from Nick Trout, who are also two veterinarians who write or have written books based on their experiences in the vet world. This book kind of surprised me. I did give it a 4 out of 5. I did very much enjoy it. It just was a lot different than I was expecting based on other books I'd read in the genre. And I think the honesty in this book is what was so different. Like, I liked it and I appreciated it, but it made me kind of wonder who his audience is. Because if you are a real, true, like, bottom of your heart animal lover, this book is probably a little hard to read. Dr. Pohl largely is working with commercial animals, and one of the realities of that is sometimes decisions about these animals' welfare has to be made based on the financial impact to the farmer. And we see that a lot throughout this book. There are times where Dr. Pohl tells a client, this animal is not fixable, or the cost to fix them would not be worth what you'll get out of it. They're not too sick to slaughter right now, so I suggest you get them on the buggy to slaughter. And I wasn't offended by that or upset by that, because I think that is really important that we are aware that with commercial animals, it's not just, we love Bessie the milk cow and she's amazing and we'll do everything to save her life. It is the reality of, this is an animal that is part of my business, and we have to make business related decisions, including cost analysis when an animal becomes sick. This is very different from with James Herriot. His books were more probably fictionalized than actually autobiographical, and they tended towards a little bit more of a fanciful view. There was still the talk of, in James Herriot and this, of, the difficulties and physicality of being a vet and having to, get up to your shirt sleeves, with your hand in the rear end of an animal. But I think James Herriot sugarcoated a little bit the commercial aspect of being a country veterinarian and working with animals that were livestock rather than pets. Nick Trout, who also wrote books about his experience as a veterinarian, including one called Tell Me Where It Hurts, which was autobiographical, he dealt more with small animals, and I think that's just a different business. My brother has a dachshund, and the dachshund recently slipped a disc, and they took him to the animal hospital because he was having symptoms of paralysis, and the animal doctor was like, well, we can fix it, but there's a 70% chance that he'll slip his disc again, and, the surgery is thousands of dollars. But my brother and his wife, they don't have children, so this dachshund is their family, it is their child, and they spent thousands of dollars to fix this dachshund, even though he's not a young dog, he's not a puppy, he is, probably, I don't know exactly, but I'd say 10, 11 years old. And the vet had said, he'll probably slip it again, we'll probably have to go through this again. And they still fixed it, because when you're working with pet animals and companion animals, the business is just very different. So I loved the honesty of Dr. Pol, but I think if you are reading it because you're an animal lover, think twice. I think this is a great book for people who are interested in the realities of veterinary medicine. This was incredibly honest. This was incredibly straightforward. And Dr. Pol, he doesn't believe in letting animals suffer, but he also is very much aware of the situation, and he's not pulling the punches that I think some of the other veterinarians I've read have pulled to make it more palatable to their audience who are animal lovers. That's who's going to read these books, and who maybe don't want to hear situations where an animal wasn't saved because of the financial cost of it, or because saving this animal, who is a breeding cow, would have meant that they were no longer able to be a breeding cow, like with a hysterectomy. And if it can't be a breeding cow, I mean, that's what it's for. So I definitely wasn't sure as I read this who the audience was. There are some really crazy moments that as an animal lover, I was like, oh. And I think the editor of this book probably tried to soften that. There was one particular instance I will mention. He had gone out about a calf that had developed inside out, and its heart was beating on, like, it was outside its body. And of course, this is a non-viable calf. No matter what Dr. Pol did, he could not have saved it. But he removed the heart and kind of made a joke about it to the farmer. And part of me was a little bit like, oh, like, I kind of find that offensive. But also, as somebody in the medical field, I know that sometimes to deal with all the horrific things you have to see, you kind of develop a dark sense of humor. And so I wasn't entirely sure in that instance, like, what to feel. Whether I was, just horrified that he's removing the heart of this calf who is non-viable. And, the editor, or Jan, I'm not sure who, made a point to say, this was the quickest, safest way to euthanize this calf. It wasn't viable. So they did mention that, but it just the way that scene played out was a little bit like, I wasn't sure what to think. And I definitely thought, if you are a deeply empathetic animal, you're like one step down from a PETA member, this book, and maybe that's an exaggeration, but like, this book may not be for everybody. If you are going to be really upset that many of his patients are commercial animals, and that many of the stories, there is the consideration of, is this animal going to be viable? Is this going to continue to do its job as livestock? If you can't handle that, this is not the book for you. This is not a ton of fluffy stories about a veterinarian who goes to every length to save Bessie the cow and sometimes can't, which I feel like was more what James Herriot was. And as I said, Nick Trout is more like companion animals, so his book was a lot different. You did have the people who, you have the dog and they love the dog and they will do anything to save it, and sometimes they just can't. So really enjoy the book, but I definitely think you have to be the right audience for it. So that was Never turn your back on an Angus cow. And if you are thinking about becoming a veterinarian, I highly recommend this book. If you think you're okay with the commercial aspect of veterinary medicine and the fact that these animals in this book are not typically dogs and cats, there's some dogs and cats mentioned, but it's mostly Bessie the cow, just know that going in. I'm glad I had a good experience with that book, because let me tell you, me and the other book that I read just did not get along. It is technically a nonfiction book, but when I show you what it is, some of you will agree that that may be using the term a little lightly. And that is Sylvia Browne's Conversations with the Other Side. For anybody who doesn't know, Sylvia Browne, I believe she has passed away since, but she was a psychic, or she claimed to be a psychic, and wrote a lot of books involving psychic things. And I've had very mixed experiences with her books. Some of them I've enjoyed, some of them I really have not liked, and this was one that I really did not like. So this book is supposed to be her spirit guide, who is Francine, coming and inhabiting her body and answering questions about what the other side is like. So the other side is the word that they use for when we die. I wouldn't call it heaven exactly, but that afterlife that people have, or they believe in reincarnation, and so like the place you live between lives. And this was supposed to be a book answering questions about that. And obviously books like this are controversial at best. I don't currently subscribe to any spiritual path. I read a lot of different things trying to find what kind of works for me and makes sense, and I wanted to at least give this a try. I had read another book years ago, and I believe it was called Journey of Souls, and it was it was written by a hypnotist who hypnotized people, asked them about their past lives and like the life between lives, and wrote a book based on their answers. And I think of the two, I really enjoyed his book a little bit more for a lot of reasons. I really debated on what rating to give this, but I decided I'm going to go with a 2 out of 5. Let me be really clear. I don't know if Sylvia is a psychic and if Francine is telling the truth in this book. This could be an absolutely real legitimate book of everything about the other side. I am not basing my opinion on that so much as saying there's a lot of things that I felt were very problematic in this book, and that in some cases either went against some of the stuff that she'd written in other places in the book, or that just logic wasn't working for. And again, it's a spiritual book. Maybe if your beliefs really line up with hers, you can forgive some of those things. I don't want to go too much into what they consider about the other side, and a lot of it is very interesting. Francine goes through like what is God, what is the point of God, to a point, what is the point of reincarnation, what is the point of life. There's a lot of interesting philosophical questions asked. One thing I would like to point out is that Sylvia is a Gnostic. That is her religion. And oftentimes in this book, it'll be like, and blah, 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 answer as the Gnostics believe. So that kind of bothered me, just because, it's hard to know, it's hard to feel like, is this really Francine, the spirit guide, talking, or is Sylvia trying to pretend to be Francine, however that worked, and still like pumping up her own religious beliefs. So how much of that was legit religious ideology, beliefs, experience from the other side, versus how much of it is, this is what the Gnostics believe, and so this is what my book says. There were also 3 elements in this book that I found incredibly, incredibly problematic. And because I felt like I couldn't do it justice, I'm pulling up my notes so that I can read you some of these passages. The first involves cancer. on page 29 of the book. So I'm going to read the passage straight to you so that I'm not putting words in her mouth. Oh, I should add before I read this excerpt that they have already established that there is lots of other planets, life on other planets. However, Earth is like the most negative, worst planet you can live on. And I find that in itself problematic. I'll bypass that for the moment. This is the only planet where cancer exists. There's no other planet with this disease. The more people are engulfed with negativity, the more self-hate they inflict upon themselves and each other, and the more cancer there is. If you stop hating yourself, you won't get cancer. That is a direct quote from the book on page 29. I have so many issues with that section of the book. Number one, in my day-to-day life, I work with cancer patients. That is part of my job. I do clerical work in a chemotherapy and infusion center. These are good people. Many of them love their life. I mean, it's a mixed bag, it's people, but most of them love their life. Most of them are fighting their cancer. These people are so strong and so heroic. And to say something like that in a book, like, oh, well, you just wouldn't get cancer if you didn't hate yourself. I just found that extremely problematic, especially considering that these are people I know, people I work with, and of course I've lost family members to cancer. And I think most of us have. And I found that just section of that book really, really offensive. Additionally, it goes against something that she says later in the book, which is that everyone knows when they write out their life path how they're going to die. And that's a little problematic too, because in her other book that I read, she said that there were like 5 exit points that every person writes into their life cycle. So 5 different places that they can decide to exit after it's not working for them anymore. And I really was bothered by that. If you're going to get cancer and that is ultimately how you're going to go out, that should just be part of that 5 exit points. You didn't need to have a whole different section about how you're just a self-hater if you get cancer. It's all your fault if you get cancer. And there's even a place where they talk about, what about people who are murdered? And she says that those people have agreed to be murdered. Like, one person wants to experience being a murder victim, and they kind of agree prior to their life with somebody who wants to experience committing murder. And if all of these, if being a murderer and being a murder victim is something you write into your chart, I don't understand how this cancer is different. Like, that seemed very unnecessary and problematic and horrible to me. I believe they were also trying to make the point that some physical manifestations of disease can be related to spiritual things, but I just think it was very poorly done and poorly put, and that happened real early in the book, and red flags for me. So the next thing that really bothered me was a section about animals. Now, I had read Sylvia's book about the life of animals and kind of what her view of animals was. And basically in her book, and I don't remember the name of it, I'm sorry, but it was about the spiritual life of animals. It's a very human-centric view, firstly. So all animals are just placed here for humans, for consumption, for companionship, to make our life nice. And in her book, she talks about how animals don't need to reincarnate. They are just here, they do their purpose, and then they go off to the other side, and that's the end for them. They don't need to learn anything. I did mention when I reviewed that book, and I believe it was last year, that I find that very problematic in itself, because you have this idea that all the history of the earth, that animals lived before us or animals who don't have any contact with us. I mean, why are they here then? That doesn't work logically, but it's a religious book, so I'm going to try to cut out that doesn't make sense, that animals are just created for our use and abuse. The part that upset me, she talks so much in that other book about how, our companion animals are going to be waiting for us on the other side. She mentions that too. Every dog you've ever owned in every past life is going to be waiting for you when you die to basically tell you how much it loves you. But, and here's the problem I have. Enemies within the animal kingdom on your plane are outright friendly on ours. The only living creatures absent on our side are those that are irritants and ecosystem necessities. Insects, such as the common housefly, ant, or mosquito, don't exist, and neither do any pests, including rats and snails. Only animals that are beautiful or that add joy to our side or are duplicated. Now, firstly, rats can be pets. I am a rodent person, and rats are intelligent, social creatures, and they have given so much of... There have been so many rat lives taken to save humans in scientific experiments and in understanding how medicines work and in studying anatomy, and to be like, well, they're a pest, that's not going to work. That's a problem. Plus, everybody has different ideas of what animals they connect with. Snails are beautiful, and some insects are beautiful. I have a friend who loves spiders, has lots of pet spiders, and I'm sure that they couldn't imagine the idea that their spider doesn't get to go to heaven, or the equivalent of heaven, but, dogs and cats do, just because dogs and cats are cute, but spiders don't. And you could, I guess, make the argument that domesticated animals are different, but that doesn't really work for me on a lot of levels. So I found her comments about animals contradictory and problematic. The next issue I had was how she explained gender. And I'll be really honest, I find gender difficult in all religions. Either a patriarchal structure in a lot of the Christian religions, or even in a lot of the nature-based religions, the view that things are masculine or feminine and that's it. And Sylvia and or Francine have the same view of everybody's soul is split in two. There's the masculine half and the feminine half. And you reincarnate typically into your gender of choice, of your natural gender. But sometimes to experience life on somebody else, you will become the opposite of your gender. And I found that really problematic in a lot of times, or in a lot of ways. In some ways, I could see that kind of explaining away people who feel very strongly that they are one gender, but were born into and assigned a different gender at birth. Anatomically, I guess, one gender and feel that they're another. But that is not where she goes with this. Each soul is innately created male or female. By the way, this is page 128. You all have a gender. When you incarnate, you generally manifest the same sexual gender that you are. Almost every soul, however, chooses one or two lives in the opposite sex to help round off the totality of their experience. I have a lot of issues with this, but a lot of religions believe something similar to this. The religion I was raised in believe that your spirit is either a male or female, which is creating a lot of issues in the transgender community within that church, but I'm going to continue. Many times an incarnation in the opposite sex can create confusion. This is one of the leading causes of homosexuality. So, I have so many issues with that statement, I can't even start. But one very simple, just logical thing here is there are plenty of people who are homosexual who don't have the personality, if you will, that we typically associate with the opposite gender. I know plenty of gay guys who are very masculine guys, like have the attributes we would typically consider to be male. And yet they have a preference for other males. I don't know how sexuality works. I don't know why some people are straight, some people are bi, some people are ace. I don't know, and I don't claim to know. But this, in her book, really, really bothered me that she made that leap, and it just didn't make sense, and it was very problematic. Again, maybe Francine knows stuff that I don't, and it doesn't make sense because I'm alive. But so many things in this book bothered me. One other thing I wanted to touch on that I did not write down the page number for, but that was also a serious issue for me with this book, was a comment that typically fetuses enter, like the spirit enters the fetus somewhere in the 4-month to 8-month range. And sometimes it has trouble adjusting to life. And she explained that that is why there are so many miscarriages and stillbirths. But most of the miscarriages happen within the first trimester. That's where you have the vast majority of miscarriages. And oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, it's fetuses that haven't even developed fully. There's a problem with the egg, there's a problem with the egg-sperm connection, and it just doesn't grow, it doesn't work, something happens. So to say that most miscarriages, or even a large portion, are caused by the spirit entering the body in the mother's womb and having trouble adjusting to the negativity of the earth plane is just horrific and problematic, and I just don't even have words. So again, the issue is all of this is speculation. Nobody's gonna know until we die. Maybe she really is channeling Francine and Francine is telling it how it is, and I just don't like what Francine has to say. My parents, who I have rejected their religion of choice, would basically say the same thing. This is the truth, you are just not listening to it and rejecting it when you give me your scientific arguments of why it doesn't make sense. But that's largely how I feel about this book. Like, it doesn't make sense, it goes against some of the other stuff that she's written, and it's problematic. And I really was hoping for some insight into life after death. I'm really doing a lot of spiritual searching right now because I'm kind of without a faith, and in the pandemic world, that's a rough place to be. You know, when you see, and it's rough as somebody in healthcare too, seeing the horrible things happening, it's hard not to have an existential crisis of, why is there all the suffering in this world? Is it because of a higher power? Is it because of a lack of a higher power? You know, it's complicated. So I've been trying to do some spiritual research, and I realize that I'm not going to like everything I read. I realize I'm not going to agree with everything I read. But I just found this so problematic. I didn't even know what to do with it. I was really, really feeling frustrated because if this is true, it's awful. It's horrible to blame people having cancer on their own self-loathing. It's not rational to assume that to say that a fetus, or the spirit of a fetus, enters the fetus late into a pregnancy, and then that causes a lot of miscarriages because they don't want to be there, but that most miscarriages actually happen in the first trimester prior to when the entry is that she is saying. She's saying it happens, 4 months to 8 months, somewhere in there, but most is prior to that. Most miscarriages are early term miscarriages. And you know, animals. I love my rats. I love my mice. I love my rodents. And they have such unique individual personalities. And to say that those animals aren't good enough for heaven, or my friend's spiders aren't good enough for heaven, it's just cute little puppies and kitties and, you know, lions and tigers and zebras and what people like. I have issues with that. I have issues with, you know, incarnations into the wrong gendered body is why people are homosexual. So many things about this book made me so mad. So those were the two nonfiction books I read in November. If you have read either of them, I would love your thoughts, your insight. I do need to confess, I have only read some of Sylvia's books, so maybe if I read more of them, I would see things that I'm missing now. Maybe there's conceptual things that I don't understand. But yeah, feel free to tell me if you've read these books. If you have read other books similar to either of these in subject matter, so either books about life as a veterinarian, not Nick Trout because I already read him, and not James Herrick because I've already read him, feel free to let me know what they are because I love this type of book. And other books that are about the other side, but that are a non-Christian, I guess, view of the other side, something that looks at reincarnation. I was raised Christian, so I'm pretty comfortable with what Christians believe as far as, at least the religion I grew up, what they believe the afterlife looks like and involves. So I'd like to get some other perspectives. So if you have an interesting religion that has an interesting afterlife, feel free to let me know. If there's another Sylvia book that you think I'd enjoy more, please let me know. I'm not counting her out completely. I've had some books of hers that I've really enjoyed that definitely made me at least question things. So I don't want to discount her entirely. This just was really problematic for me. Also, if you have read other books by her that you know are going to be problematic in similar ways, especially with things like cancer patients and miscarriage, those are topics close to my heart, and so is, you know, the LGBTQ community and animals, you know, all these things that might be triggering for me. If you know any of her books are going to trigger me, please let me know. All right, guys, that has been my reading in November. There has not been a lot of it because pandemic, time to read is hard, my new job is busy, and I am reading other things, but it's a slow process. I'm not reading the 2 to 3 books a week that I was prior to the pandemic and prior to the major changes in my life. The very positive changes, but changes nonetheless. I would also like to remind everybody that along with being a book reviewer on YouTube, I am also a writer of books. I have not put out a book very recently, but I will be linking below my backlist of books, or my Amazon page. So if you are interested in my books, several are on Kindle Unlimited that you can check out for free if you have a membership, and several are on Smashwords and other sites such as Barnes & Noble, Kobo, pretty much wherever books are sold. They're ebooks, they're just a couple dollars, as much as a Starbucks cup of coffee in most cases. So if you'd like to support me, I don't have a Patreon, you know, I just YouTube because I enjoy it, it's fun, I like to talk about books, and I like to talk about books with you guys. But if you would like to support me, buy a book. Buy a book for somebody for Christmas, it is the season. Also, if you enjoy my content, please subscribe. If you enjoyed this video, hit like, it helps the algorithm, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Thanks. Bye.